It's really interesting. Those are good ways of doing it, cherries, etc. But the modern food industry have got very canny at the dopamine manipulation.
Yes.
In fact, just manipulating so much of our hunger, and as you say, hijacking it, hijacking our brains, you say. And, you know, you give some incredibly eye-opening examples of just the length that the fast food companies and various other places go to get people addicted to their food. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about just what they've done in order to hijack our taste buds. For example, the bliss point.
Yeah. So when you create food in nature, or when you eat natural foods, they create a burst of dopamine, often, especially like fruits and things that are brightly colored and very attractive in nature. And the point is to make you remember that experience, make you remember how to get to that food again. There's various theories about why our body would want to create dopamine. It's mostly that it's good for survival. Our body remembers the situation where we ate that big, juicy, ripe fruit, you know. So what they've done is there are labs set up all around the world where you know, volunteers are brought in and they're connected to electrodes, and they've given them foods, and they're trying to see what foods can create the biggest explosion of dopamine in your brain. These are things that are well beyond what a fruit tree could ever do for us. These are flavors that create the perfect combination of sweet, salty, crunchy, and light up the areas of our dopamine, but then don't release the hormones that tell us when to stop. So, for example, the goal would be, if you were making the ideal snack food, would be to create a food that gave you the biggest dopamine explosion because the flavors had, you know, basically a bliss point or a perfect texture, flavor profile that had the biggest explosion of dopamine, but not trigger it so much that our leptin, our GLP-1, our satiation hormones would be released. So that's why you can eat an entire bag of some of these foods without ever actually feeling full.
We should talk about a slightly more positive thing here, because obviously I should say, or perhaps you could emphasize that the reason it's good to draw out these examples is because in order to deal with cravings, recognizing what they're doing to manipulate us will help people, I assume, and you hope, to avoid these places and avoid these foods.
Yeah, if you think about it, we talk a lot about alcohol or gambling or how to, you know, control those cravings or how to stop the addiction, but we hardly ever talk to people about how to control your cravings for food and how to manage yourself around these things that are as addicting, if not more. They're like drug-like substances, especially when you get these hyper-engineered foods.
Yeah. So tell us, a lot of people I know are going to ask about this, and you are very excited about psychobiotics. We are more and more being told about our microbiome and just the extraordinary importance of our gut bacteria, the microbes that live in our guts, how they affect our health, our mental health, our brains, brain-gut axis. So I want to talk about this for a bit. Perhaps you could start by saying why they are so incredibly important, the sort of science of what they're doing there and why they're so important. And then we can talk about the ways that we can, you know, love them and nourish them and do the best by them.
And that's so, I mean, it's mind-blowing. Okay, you can take the gut bacteria from a schizophrenic person and compare it to someone who doesn't have schizophrenia, which is a severe mental health disorder, and distinguish them just by looking at their gut bacteria alone, because their gut bacteria look different. Then in a second part of this experiment, they took the microbiome from the schizophrenic patient and the microbiome from non-schizophrenic patients, and they put it into mice who didn't have any microbiome of their own. And they found that just by transferring the gut bacteria, they were able to recreate mental health disease in these animals, meaning the animals that got the gut bacteria from schizophrenic patients started to develop behaviors that are schizophrenic. And they were able to say, hey, not only are we seeing a distinct gut bacterial change in these people, we're able to show that just by transplanting their gut bacteria, we could change the entire mental state of the animal. And so that's how psychobiotics started to become really interesting. So then they did the experiment with depression. They found you could transplant depression from one animal to another. And then they found out that you could actually cure depression. You can cure autism. You can cure, these animal models became so enticing. You could really change autism, dementia, depression, schizophrenia. So then they started to say, well, how do we use this in our clinical setting to help people with depression, anxiety, autism, dementia? Can we give them bacteria without actually transplanting one gut bacteria to another? Can we do something to actually change the gut bacteria in someone's gut so that they can cure themselves from depression or disease? And what we found out is that there is a lot of potential in this world of psychobiotics. We are very close. We still don't have the exact, pill-based probiotic to cure all these things, but we are very close. But what we do know, and the reason I wrote the book, is the number one way you can change your gut bacteria is through diet. Dietary change is a surefire way, even better than probiotics, to change your gut bacterial makeup into one that is more favorable. So that's what's exciting.
It is exciting. And what's exciting is the agency that we have, because
Yes.
You say we can manipulate our microbes, rebuild a healthy microbiome in just a few days. Obviously we can't just click our fingers, but you give such helpful, again, practical, step-by-step and not difficult to follow advice. And the thing is, it's not about, and I think this really appeals, it's not about what we shouldn't have so much as what we should have. And
Yes.
I wonder if you could just tell us some of the ways in which in a very small amount of time we can replenish and help our microbiome. And it's more than just probiotics that you buy off the shelf. In fact, it's much more than that.
Absolutely. It would be the study that showed that 3 days is all you need is a landmark study, because what they did is they said, okay, we know that dietary changes change the microbiome. Let's give it 2 weeks, and we start to see change these people. First, they put them on a very highly processed, typical of industrialized countries, like, ultra processed diet. And then they had them on that for 2 weeks. And then for the next 2 weeks, they changed their diet rapidly into one that was whole food, plant focused, unprocessed, low sugar, to see like, okay, what if we change our diet very rapidly? How quickly can we start to see, recovery? And they found out that in just 3 days, the microbiome looked markedly different than it did after having 2 weeks of the processed junk food. And so it was really encouraging, because we think, oh, wow, we can start to change our diet, start to make these, interventions in our life, and we can actually see change in a very short period of time.
What are the key recommendations from you in terms of what we can do to change our diet?
Yeah, so in the book, I talk about 6 different foods that you should be including every day. And those foods include fiber. Number 1 is fiber, because our gut bacteria are starving. 98% of people in the industrialized world do not get enough fiber. And so what's happening is that these gut bacteria are starving to death because they're not getting the food that they need. Number 2 is polyphenols. Polyphenols are brightly colored vegetables and fruits, but it's also your green tea, your coffee, your dark chocolate. These things are food for your gut bacteria as well. Then we have omega-3 fatty acid foods. So things like salmon and fatty fish, or if you're vegan, it's algae oil, flaxseed, walnuts. These things raise your omega-3 levels, which release craving, kind of crushing hormones, as well as improving your gut health. Then we have amino acid rich foods, which are high protein foods. This not only helps with your cravings, but your gut health. Then we have dopamine supporting foods, which again, I was telling you about, that will help your cravings, but also help your gut bacteria produce more dopamine and make them happier per se. And the last 6th food is glucosinolates. Glucosinolates are your broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage. They have these special sulfur compounds that are so beneficial for your gut bacteria and also for your brain.
So would you say that buying off the shelf probiotics is something that everybody should do, or do you think that it's better to do it with these foods that you recommend?
Yeah, I definitely think food first approach when it comes to probiotics, because here's the thing. If you throw seeds from a helicopter into a barren field, and your seeds are meant to be for a winter climate, but you're throwing it into a barren, hot desert climate, those seeds are just a waste, right? They're not going to take, there's not going to be seedlings. That's what probiotics are. It's like a shot in the dark. Like you have a very unique bacterial, viral, and parasitic makeup in your microbiome. And you need to get more of the seedlings that fit into that environment. Now, so that's why I talk more about fiber and eating polyphenols and prebiotic foods, because you want to nurture your own garden. You have seedlings there that can be nurtured. And when you're adding probiotics, you're hoping that you're getting the right ones. But what we realize is that probiotic foods have this unique matrix and ability to seed into our intestines, as opposed to taking pills. So for all those reasons, I still think that we should take a food first approach when it comes to this.
Do you think that it is harder for vegans to get the right probiotics? And there's so much obviously positive talk about a plant-based diet, but then a lot of the things you talk about, the fish oils and, for example, yogurts, and a lot of the probiotics come from non-plant-based foods. So what do you think about a plant-based diet? Is it harder to get the microbiome right with a plant-based diet?
Well, plant-based diets can range from extremely healthy with full of fermented foods to extremely processed.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that there's one right answer, but I do think that some people think that going vegan is the answer to all of their problems. And it's not. It's, in fact, like you alluded to, in some ways it's more difficult.
Yeah.
I think what we want is more plants in a plant-based diet, but sometimes people go plant-based and they're just having, the alternative meats and the alternative snacks. And what we want is, if you're going plant-based, you want to have more vegetables with fiber, more polyphenols, more fermented foods. That's the right way to do it.
Yeah. There's so much to ask you. We could be here for many, many hours, but I would love to hear your expression, unlearned eating. So people have heard of intuitive eating, where you feel your body supposedly, and you react to the signs your body is giving you. But you have something different that you call unlearned eating. And I wonder if you could tell us about how to practice unlearned eating and why it's important that we do.
Yeah. Intuitive eating in its actual, real, true form is absolutely beneficial. Learning your own body's signals, taking away a lot of the external world signals. But when a lot of us hear, like when I used to hear about intuitive eating, what I thought was, oh, if I'm feeling like having something unhealthy right now, that's my body telling me I need it and I should go and get it, and we live in this world, as we talked about, that is hijacked. Our brains are hijacked by these companies who know how to trigger our cravings. If you're craving Instagram, if you're craving, gambling, if you're craving alcohol, if you're craving sugary, fatty, processed foods, a lot of that has to do with the advertising, the messaging, the ways they present these things to us. So if you really were a layperson saying intuitive eating, you'd say, oh, well, my intuition told me to eat this. My intuition told me to choose this food or whatever. So what I want to say is, hey, a lot of this intuition that happens is happening when we're children. So, for example, you go to a fun game, or you watch a movie with your parents, or you have a great experience with your family, and they always used to eat those same foods during that time to celebrate or to commemorate the occasion. And now when you want to celebrate, or you want to relax, or you want that same feeling of comfort, you seek out those foods. Mm-hmm. And so unlearned eating means realize that some of that was learned behaviors. Your body just wants, your brain pathways just want easy ways to comfort you, easy ways to boost your mood, easy ways to, and when you have those old patterns, it's really hard to break them until you say to yourself, oh, you know what, this is not healthy, that I pick up this unhealthy thing every single time I want to celebrate, because that's what my parents did for many years. So unlearned eating means recognizing these negative patterns. Some of them may be positive, like, maybe you had broccoli every time, you were home, and that's great. But some of them are negative, and you want to unlearn those patterns. And so I talk about certain techniques to retrain your cravings.
Retrain is one of your 5 steps to freedom from hunger and cravings. And I'm going to move on very shortly to audience questions, because we have always such brilliant questions from the audience, and I want to make sure we get through as many as possible. But just because I think it's a really important and interesting part of that, all of it's interesting, but your 5 steps: replenish, rewire, reset, refresh, retrain. I just wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the refresh part and the great importance of sleep. And your book is a lot about what we should eat, but ultimately it goes out the window if we don't really pay attention to how long, how deeply, and how well we sleep in order to regulate hormones and those cravings and our weight and everything to do with our health, really.
Absolutely. So, when we go to sleep, we actually activate lots of hormones in our brain. And sometimes if you haven't had a good night of sleep, you'll wonder, why am I craving so many unhealthy foods? And why do I not feel satisfied? It's not just in your head. It's actually true that in studies, they've shown that your ghrelin levels, which is your hunger hormone, are much higher when you don't get a good night's sleep. And your leptin, your satiation hormone, the one that makes you feel satisfied, is much lower when you haven't gotten a good night of sleep. So what you end up doing is you're really shortchanging your hormones, so that now you are craving things that you wouldn't be normally. You're not as satiated, and you seem to be hungry all the time. And so sleep is not only great for your brain, but great for your hormones, so that they can be regulated throughout the day.
And you actually have, we can't go into them, but you do have, everyone has their advice about how to sleep. I've been lucky enough to read sort of some very good advice, but I think you have a really good and quite simple technique that people can use when they're lying in bed. And I wonder if you could go through that, and then I will move on to audience questions, albeit a bit reluctantly, because there's so much more to ask you.
Yeah, this is, and sleep is such a difficult thing in today's world, because we live in a place where we're getting a lot of blue light, like bright lights in the evenings. It's confusing to our brain. And then we don't get enough sunlight during the day. So our bodies are quite confused. So what I recommend is that when you are going to sleep, first of all, sleep hygiene is huge. So make it cold in your room, make it dark in your room, make it quiet in your room, stop all of the devices and working at least 2 hours before bed, stop eating 3 hours before bed. And then when you are lying in bed, the technique that I teach is to take you out of your forebrain, the thinking brain, the one that's thinking about all the things you forgot to do today, all the things you have to do tomorrow. I don't know about you, but when I lie down into bed, the first thing I think about is, oh gosh, I got to do this tomorrow. I have to do this, or I forgot to do this, or this. And so what you want to do is you want to take yourself out of your forebrain, out of your thinking, your to-do list brain, and back into the imaginative brain or the visual creative brain. And the whole point of this exercise that I teach is to relax your body and to put it into a state where you're able to go into the creative or visualization state, so that you are not thinking about, hey, what do I need to do tomorrow morning?